Hello there, my RPG lovers, and welcome to another video. It's crazy to think that it's been almost 9 years since Elex came out.
What are you doing here?
I'm waiting on your mom.
This game was supposed to be a major turning point for Piranha Bytes, the developer of Elex, because it was their brand new IP. And while the first Elex game was actually quite successful, the sequel for Elex was the last nail in the coffin for this studio.
It could have been a lot worse.
After a disappointing end to the Risen trilogy, they needed something new, something different yet familiar. Because no matter how different they tried to make their new games, they always tried to capture that lightning in a bottle that Gothic once had.
I wouldn't have expected anything else from you.
How successful they were with this is always up for debate, and it would vary from game to game. Many people think that Risen 1 came very close to achieving that, and I would definitely agree. Risen 1 was the closest that Piranha Bytes ever got to creating Gothic 1 again. However, I also think that Elex 1 was up there as well. I mean, it was not exactly very similar to Gothic 1, but it had all bells and whistles of a Piranha Bytes RPG, and a lot more than that actually. Elex was a much more ambitious game in terms of the scope, and that will always cause more problems, especially for a small development team like Piranha Bytes. They knew this really well after Gothic 3 released in an unfinished state. The scope of Risen 3 was also bigger than previous Risen games, but Elex was on another level, literally and figuratively. This was the first game that actually tried to improve and build upon the original Gothic formula. Having a jetpack would change the exploration experience down to its core. And not only that, it would change all aspects of the gameplay in Elex. Before this game came out, I was very skeptical about this feature, because I thought it had the potential to ruin the exploration as we know it in Piranha Bytes games. But it ended up being the best design decision that Piranha Bytes made in a long time, and it finally felt like their games evolved in a way. On the other side, the stiff control scheme and janky gameplay would hold the game down a lot, combined with a very challenging beginning that will make a lot of people quit before experiencing some of its amazing open world features. Elex failed to reach its true potential. Although that's debatable, because if we take a look at these numbers, they're actually very impressive. 23k peak players on Steam back in 2017 for a AA RPG is quite impressive, even in 2026. To put this into perspective, that number is still higher than Avowed and The Outer Worlds 2. So this game had all the potential in the world, and if it didn't have those problems on the fundamental level, it could have even saved this studio from closing down. Even though Risen 3 was not an amazing game, it seemed like this studio finally figured out how to tone down and almost eliminate the janky feeling of the gameplay. That game had surprisingly great animations, even in combat, and a decent control scheme, but it was not a very compelling RPG in general, and it ended up feeling aggressively mediocre. Elex felt like a complete reset, for better and for worse. It had the most advanced and complex storyline out of all Piranha Bytes games. It also tried to do something unconventional, especially when it comes to the Western RPGs. It would mix sci-fi, post-apocalypse and medieval fantasy, quite successfully actually. But everything they kind of fixed in Risen 3 when it comes to fundamental mechanics and smoother gameplay was completely gone in Elex. Elex had more depth within its gameplay systems, that's for sure, but it felt so much worse on the fundamental level. So it's hard to blame anyone who quits this game early on, because it's very beginner-unfriendly by design. And that beginner-unfriendly experience gets even worse because of the janky combat. Not everyone is willing to jump through these hoops before they can experience a great RPG. But I'm here to tell you why you should give this game another chance in 2026. And if you decide to buy Elex, you can get it for about $5 on Eneba, which happens to be the sponsor of this video. Eneba is a completely legit and huge gaming marketplace where you can find a ton of digital game keys and gift cards for various platforms such as PC, PlayStation, Xbox and Nintendo. Elex is $30 on Steam currently, but you can get it for about $5 on Eneba. So how is this legit? Well, Eneba basically buys game keys in bulk and huge discounts, and then they resell them at a slightly higher price so they can still make some profits. I discovered Eneba a couple of years ago when I bought my PS5. PlayStation Network is officially not supported in my country, so I had to set my store to UK and buy some gift cards for the UK store currency. It's easy, fast, and completely legit. For example, you can save around $10 on Ark Raiders, $12 on Reanimal, or up to $27 on Neo 3. Even if it happens that your code doesn't work for whatever reason, you can just send a couple of screenshots to their highly active support team and you'll get another one that works in no time. So yeah, check out Eneba for some amazing gaming deals and make sure to use my links in video description or in the pinned comments. Huge thanks to them for reaching out to the channel and sponsoring the video. Now, back to Elex. So, we are going to talk about all of its major features, all strengths and weaknesses, because underneath all of that jank, there is an amazing RPG waiting for you. And after all, I'm the master of janky games, bitch.
One boss took me almost 2 hours to slay because I had to get lucky and not trigger his unblockable, nearly undodgeable rock throw attack too many times. Nearly undodgeable rock throw attack too many.
Yeah man, those videos bring some great memories, because I used to make a lot of these guides for Elex back in the day. Since we already started talking about the gameplay features and systems, let's open up this video by analyzing the gameplay in general. Your character Jax finds himself in a very rough situation after his brother tried to kill him. But we'll talk about the story and the setting right after the gameplay section. All you need to know so far is that you're playing as a predetermined character named Jax, who is simply trying to survive and learn what happened before his people tried to execute him. The gameplay in Elex opens up by introducing you to some very stiff controls and the combat with rats. Yeah, classic RPG trope, right? You'll mostly fight rats and smaller creatures in the beginning, especially if you stick with Duras and follow him to the first big city. Which you definitely should, by the way, because it will make your life a lot easier in the beginning. Your first introduction to combat is supposed to teach you about the combo system which Elex has, some defensive skills like the dodge and the stamina system. The controls for most combat actions are fine, even though they are not extremely responsive. However, turning Jax around in and out of combat, as well as running, can feel pretty stiff. I think this is the core of the problem with the janky gameplay and why controlling Jax can feel pretty bad. What has to be the worst part about Elex control scheme is the delay you might get when you try to sprint. I don't know what's up with that, but Jax won't instantly start sprinting sometimes, and it can be very annoying, especially when you're trying to run for your life, which happens quite a bit in this game. It really takes a while to get used to how Jax moves around. Shortly after you begin the game you get a jetpack, and this instantly changes your entire perspective of movement in Elex. It's not something that will allow you to fly around the map very fast or anything similar to that. You have a very limited air time, and later on you can also unlock a couple of combat moves and the ability to float. The controls for activating the jetpack are actually very intuitive. It's the same button for jumping, but if you hold it, it will activate the jetpack. The amount of fuel you have is very limited. The blue part is your main source and the red part is the reserve. This seems a bit awkward at first, but it starts making a lot of sense once you start using it. If you hold the jetpack button and try to spend all of your fuel, Jax will instantly stop before you reach the reserve. This will allow you to press the button again and use the rest of the fuel. The reserve allows you to safely land if you miscalculate the distance of whatever you're climbing, or you just have enough fuel in the reserve to reach that next cliff. The limitations of this feature keep it from trivializing the whole exploration experience. It's just good enough to give you that extra edge while exploring this extremely vertical map, but it can also easily kill you if you're not careful. The janky control scheme can also rear its ugly head, and sometimes you end up dying because of it. This can usually happen when Jax makes an awkward hop while landing, which can easily get you kills. Other than that, the jetpack feature works just fine, it's not so hard, and I love that it's not a brainless flying mechanic. You are forced to think before you use it because it's so restrictive. It's extremely useful though, so you're going to use it constantly. Besides the jetpack, Jax can also easily climb most things by simply grabbing the ledges. It's a useful mechanic for sure, especially in combination with the jetpack. Despite the very awkward animation for it, which still looks better than Avowed, by the way. The world map in Elex is basically built around the jetpack exploration, but more about the map design a bit later. I'll circle back to jetpack in the exploration segment of the video. Now let's go back to combat. This game has a combo system like most PB RPGs in the past, but this time around we have a stamina system as well. A new feature in PB RPGs that felt totally unnecessary. The combo system is already similar to previous PB RPGs, which had no stamina system at all. Your success rate in combat was determined by how well you performed these combos. You would need a good timing at the end of the hit animation. Elex is no different, you still need a good timing for combos, but now you also have to worry about stamina as well. We have to understand that back in 2017, pretty much all action RPGs, Souls-like and other similar games started implementing stamina systems left and right, where it does and where it doesn't make a lot of sense. Dark Souls' influence was crazy when it comes to this, and unfortunately, even Piranha Bytes felt the need to implement this system. Probably to try and attract some new audience who already got used to seeing stamina systems in pretty much all action RPGs. Whatever the reason might be, the stamina system in Elex is a huge deal. Here's the thing though, you can turn off stamina completely in the gameplay menu if you want. Having options like that is always a big plus, but I don't know what to think about this, to be honest. I always leave the stamina as it is and I just try to play the game as intended. I won't blame anyone for turning it off though. There are ways to increase your stamina of course, and it will make a huge difference in combat when you do. What's really annoying and a somewhat outdated mechanic is the cost for sprinting outside of combat. It will still cost you stamina. I think we only recently start seeing a global change when it comes to the stamina system in RPGs and exploration. Most RPGs nowadays would just turn off your stamina completely outside of combat for actions like running and just moving through the world. Jax has very little stamina at first and you're barely even able to complete the full combo. If you find the game extremely annoying and you want to quit, try turning off the stamina or maybe just reducing it to low and see how that works for you. Elex is a challenging game even without this, so you shouldn't feel bad if you decide to do this. When I first completed Elex back in 2017, I played on the second hardest difficulty. I also played on the highest difficulty, but ever since then, I don't want to touch anything close to those difficulty settings. That was more of an experiment, just to see if I could do it, but I absolutely do not recommend playing on anything else than normal or even easy. If it happens that you played this game before and quit, I highly suggest playing it on easy if you're trying to get back into it. You can always increase the difficulty if you find it too easy later on. Changing the difficulty affects a lot of options in the gameplay menu. I don't like how the normal and easy difficulty turn on the aggressive aim assist for the controller, so I always keep it off or on the lowest setting. Another option you should turn off is the auto lock-on. On lower difficulties, this option is automatically on, which causes you to lock on immediately when you enter a battle. Turn it off right now and thank me later. You can still use the lock on button of course, manually. So yeah, both of my recent playthroughs were on normal difficulty. I think Piranha Bytes shot themselves in the foot with this many difficulty options. By trying to please everyone with various difficulty settings, you usually achieve a totally opposite effect. It's nearly impossible to balance out all of those difficulty settings equally. That's why I always prefer a single difficulty or 2 difficulties in total, because it's a lot easier to balance it out and everyone is getting the same experience, pretty much. And it's not like Piranha Bytes didn't do something similar in their previous games, so I don't know why they decided to go with multiple difficulty settings. I think it's yet another attempt to try and get attention from a brand new audience, which is not bad, but I think this game could have done a lot better with a single, more balanced difficulty setting. Anyway, Elex won't be easy even on the easy difficulty, especially in the beginning. As with all Piranha Bytes RPGs, you're not supposed to try and kill everything that moves in the beginning of the game. You can solve a lot of quests by just talking to people, and carefully picking your fights is what you're supposed to do. The sooner you understand that, the better, and it instantly changes the way you're playing the game, as well as your enjoyment of it. As always in PBRPGs, enemies that are even worth fighting have prefix titles like young, weak, and something similar. Even these kinds of enemies will offer a serious challenge from level 1 to 10, but your first big challenge is getting used to a pretty stiff control scheme. I always played Elex with a controller, but I also played a little bit with mouse and keyboard. If you're going for a ranged build, which is a high possibility actually, regardless of your faction choice, you might want to stick with mouse and keyboard because of aiming. On the other hand, melee combat is at least slightly better with the controller, I would say. But no matter which playstyle you go for, the melee combat is your introduction to Elex's gameplay. Unfortunately, the melee combat leaves some pretty bad first impressions. Hitting things in this game sounds like you're hitting a trash can, no matter which enemy you're fighting, and other combat sound effects are not much better. The melee combat animations are not that bad. They are certainly not amazing or anything, but I think they're fine. All melee weapons have unique animations and movesets, which is pretty cool. Unfortunately, we can't say the same about the ranged weapons. Pretty much all guns have the same animation and recoil. Wait a minute, laser guns have recoil? What? I mean, it's probably done for balancing reasons, but it certainly looks stupid. What has to be the biggest disappointment when it comes to combat animations are magical abilities. Clerics and berserkers have some magical abilities that you can learn, and all damaging spells will have the same boring animation. And once again, there is a fucking recoil. What? Literally the same recoil that the game uses for everything else. Guns, laser weapons, bows, and magical abilities all have this silly mechanic. There are guns in Elex that definitely should have a recoil mechanic, but using the same mechanic for all of these weapon types and abilities is just very silly. It certainly doesn't improve the combat, it only makes it feel worse. Personally, it doesn't bother me that much, except when it comes to magical abilities. That's because Risen 3, their previous game, had freaking amazing animations. The magic spells in that game had some very cool casting animations, which were a part of the combo system of that game. Elex is a far superior RPG compared to Risen 3, but things like this fail to make a lot of sense to me. What was stopping them from just recycling the same magic animations for this game? I would rather see that again than having a brand new, crappy animation with a recoil on top of it. But it is what it is. Wait a moment, C4G, aren't you supposed to convince me to try this game out again? So far, it only seems like you're shitting on this game in general.
Do you have anything to say in your defense?
Listen, we have to get some bad things out of the way first, okay? After all, I always try my best to keep it as objective as possible in my retrospectives. So let's talk about some positive stuff related to combat. The combat and the gameplay in general in Elex have a lot of good things about it, believe it or not. Pretty much all of these ranged weapons and abilities have around 3 different firing modes, and I already mentioned different animations and movesets for all melee weapon types. For example, you can use the semi-automatic mode and shoot only 1 bullet with your gun, burst with 3 bullets at once, or switch to fully automatic. Items like bombs also have different modes, and even some magical abilities can be casted in various ways. It all depends on what you're fighting and if you're trying to focus on one or more enemies at once. The melee combat gets way better and really viable a bit later on when you get your build going. Two-handed weapons like swords can hit multiple enemies in front of you, and all it takes is a good combo with a quality weapon to take them down. And of course, you still have to pick your fights, depending on your weapons, gear, level and area. But it's usually obvious if you should pick a fight with something or someone at the first place, or just run and come back later. This might seem impossible in early stages of the game because everything can easily kill you. But that was always the general idea of combat in PBRPGs, because it was all about the sense of progression. You simply have to be very weak in the beginning in order for progression to feel that impactful later on. Elex is no different, and it feels really good once you finally start getting stronger. It sucks that you also have to deal with bad parts of the combat and the jankiness, because this certainly doesn't make the game any better. In fact, it makes the early game much more tedious than it should be. Some weapons and abilities have very bad hitboxes, which can just piss you off. Your dodge ability is almost useless sometimes because of this. You can still learn how to time your dodges and avoid even the worst hitbox in the game, but you probably should not try to play like this. It takes a lot of effort, and it's not that satisfying to pull off or rewarding. This always bothered me about this game because I knew 90% of people won't even figure this out, and Piranha Bytes only has themselves to blame. The potential for a great skill-based combat was there, but it was just way too rough around the edges, to put it lightly. Still though, I tried to make some guides and tips back in the day and showcase what you can actually do in these combats. But you can just rely on the progression system, leveling up and getting better gear, and you'll do just fine in combat, regardless of your build. This game also expects you to pick everything up that's not nailed down, and if you train yourself to do this from the very beginning, you'll be in a huge advantage in combat. There are items you can pick up which can kill enemies with 1 or 2 hits. Those items are usually one-time use only, but they are not that rare to find, and you can also buy some of them. If you save these items for killing some much stronger enemies, you're going to have a much smoother gameplay experience, especially at first. Once you get your build going and get a lot stronger, the combat experience gets a lot smoother in general. I mean, you'll still have to deal with some pretty bad hitboxes and wonky animations, but the gameplay experience becomes way more enjoyable in general. There is a special attack for all weapon types, which is usually not even worth doing in the beginning of the game. It's not doing that much extra damage, and it will usually leave you with 0 stamina and defenseless. Depending on how successful you pull off your combo, the easier it is to fill this bar up and use the special attack. It becomes a lot more useful later on when you have a lot more stamina and when you become stronger in general. Now of course, if you decide to turn off the stamina, using this move all the time is a no-brainer. Speaking of special attacks, learning how to use some jetpack abilities is also pretty cool and useful. You can learn one melee and one ranged move with the jetpack. I think the one for ranged attacks is much more useful because it allows you to float and fire your weapon. It also doesn't use a lot of jetpack fuel, so you can use it all the time. The majority of enemies in Elex have some sort of a ranged attack and they can snipe you from afar. It's not that hard to avoid these attacks, but you have to maneuver with the jetpack a bit more carefully because of this. Overall, it's a pretty cool ability and very fun to use. Elex has a pretty good enemy variety, from smaller critters to medium and huge monsters and human enemies as well. Fighting human NPCs is much different compared to fighting beasts and monsters. Some large mutant creatures have pretty bad animations though, and it's a nightmare fighting them in melee range because of this. Other large monsters are mostly fine, but you'll definitely struggle with most of them the first time you face them in a fight, especially as a melee character. However, Elex has a lot of companions that you can take with you, and you probably should. Exploring this world with a companion is much more enjoyable and very useful in combat. They all have different weapons and attacks, but more importantly, they will keep the enemies busy while you can deal damage. I'll talk more about the companions a bit later. Playing solo is way more challenging, that's for sure. When it comes to huge monsters you have to fight, they all have decent attack animations that you can predict because they are usually way slower. Smaller creatures can bother you in the beginning, especially with some charging attacks, but once you figure it out, they become really easy to fight. Fighting humans is more predictable because of their animations, but like I said before, some weapon types have pretty bad hitboxes that will piss you off. Dodging in Elex can be pretty rough and you will still get hit a lot. That's usually because you have to dodge a lot later than it seems, in most cases. However, the step dodge can be way more useful if you learn how to use it. The animation is much shorter and it seems like you get the same amount of iframes like from the regular dodge. It's a bit harder to master, but not impossible. Joining a faction and getting to learn some of their unique abilities is going to change the combat drastically. However, you will have to be careful with stat points because all unique faction abilities require specific stat points invested. On my first playthrough with the Berserkers, I didn't even have enough stat points to use most of their unique abilities. I simply focused on using a bow and a two-handed sword, and it worked fine even on the second hardest difficulty. But I definitely do not recommend ignoring all of these faction unique abilities because they will change how you play the game in general. It's a shame that most of these fundamental combat mechanics in Elex are very rough around the edges because the sheer variety of options you get for fighting is very good. It's one of those things which will make you come back for another playthrough. I still never completed a game with Outlaws, so I'm not exactly sure how it feels to play with them. Clerics and Berserkers couldn't be more different even if they tried. Although some of the magical abilities can feel somewhat same-ish. Clerics also have some very cool non-combat abilities. The one called Suggestion is very fun to use, it's basically like a Jedi mind trick option you get in dialogue with NPCs. Overall, it's a very strong variety of combat abilities for all factions. The progression system in PBRPGs is the staple of their games, and Elex is no different. Well, kind of. Some of the stronger abilities that you can learn are overpowered, making the balancing of the game look like a joke, even on the hardest difficulty. My cleric playthrough was based around laser guns and cleric abilities. Some of those abilities can permanently stun lock enemies and deal some great damage. The majority of enemies can be easily killed like this, and it feels like you're cheesing the game. Other factions have similar ways of cheesing the combats. For example, the Berserkers can learn Scatter Shot with the bow, an ability that shouldn't take you long to acquire when you join this faction. You fire 3 arrows at once with this ability, but if you're close to your target, all 3 arrows can hit the same target. This is certainly a more skill-based ability, and you need more effort for pulling this off, but it's very deadly when you do. Once you figure it out, you can do some massive damage to enemies. It's not like you don't have limitations and penalties for using such powerful abilities, but they're just easily ignored for the most part. I mean, sure, you need potions to refill your energy, and you can also damage yourself if you're not careful, but this is not a huge problem. You constantly need to buy more arrows if you're firing 3 shots at once all the time, and so on, you get the picture. But the stun lock on this cleric ability is just way too overpowered. If you're playing a cleric and you get your hands on this ability, you won't want to use anything else. I'm probably making it look a lot easier than it actually is. You will need to stack up potions and spend a lot of money, or use the alchemy to keep using this ability. So it's not like you can just run around and spam this ability all the time. Other cleric abilities are also pretty cool and useful. Overall, getting stronger in Elex feels great, despite some of these issues with the balancing. Gaining new ranks in your respectable faction is a huge deal, because you will gain new armor sets and titles. You will still need to buy these armor sets, and they are not freaking cheap. But I really enjoyed this part of the progression system, it feels like you earned everything. And considering how brutal the gameplay experience in Elex can be, from all the good and bad things about it, it feels very rewarding once you finally get stronger. So despite all of the issues with the combat, you'll definitely get an amazing sense of progression if you stick around long enough to advance in ranks of your faction. As a matter of fact, it's a rare action RPG with such an amazing sense of progression. It's nothing new when it comes to PBRPGs, but it can be new to everyone who is trying one of their games for the first time ever.
And I don't have any reasons why I should change my mind.
Once this clicks with you, you'll probably start understanding why these games have such loyal following for over 25 plus years, and why a lot of people are just willing to forgive or ignore some of these gameplay problems we mentioned. Which brings us to another topic and another major reason why I love playing Elex.
So, you decided to stick around.
This game has one of the best open world exploration in an RPG that you'll ever experience, and I'm not saying that lightly. It's not perfect, but it comes very close to that, to be honest. To go back to our jetpack discussion, this feature basically revolutionized the exploration in Piranha Bytes RPGs. It's more like a simple tool you get to use instead of a full-blown jetpack. You can't fly around the map or use it to travel very fast, but you will use it to explore every nook and cranny of this massive open world. The map in Elex is simply begging you to explore everything that might look even remotely interesting. On the other side, you'll have to control yourself in the beginning because most of these places are very dangerous. You'll use the jetpack to escape most of the time until you get stronger and even start using it in combat. It's another small but impactful layer of progression in the game. You'll start by exploring the green, mountainous locations of Eden, green open fields of Abessa, volcanic map of Ignadon, snowy parts of Zakor, and a big desert of Tavar. The visual variety of these locations is simply amazing. But what's even more impressive is how the landmass has been built. Once you start exploring everything, either on foot or with your jetpack, you'll probably notice why this kind of a world map had to be built by hand. No procedural generation or anything similar has been used in creating this map, as far as we know. That was always the case with PBRPGs, everything is made by hand, so it's not a surprise. But you won't be able to truly appreciate this until you do some serious exploration in the game. The verticality of the map is one of its biggest strengths. It's not just about going up and down all the time, it's built in a way that seems believable, but more importantly, enjoyable to travel and discover new NPCs, quests, items and locations. The sense of danger from exploring the world is very strong in the beginning, but it gets manageable somewhere close to the mid-game. By then, you'll be able to explore most of the world without dying if something just looks at you. I think the sense of danger is a very important aspect to get right in open world games, because it goes back to that philosophy of coming back stronger and defeating the enemy that killed you so many times. It's the same for exploring an area that you never could before because of those strong monsters. And if the area is very interesting by itself, there is a chance it's going to be very memorable. And it's a big plus if you have an interesting quest or a special item to find on top of that. Elex has plenty of those areas in all zones. This is the first PBRPG after Gothic 3 which had a massive and connected open world. Another reason for Gothic 3 comparison would be 3 different biomes that you get to explore. It's like an evolved version of that map with even more verticality and a jetpack. All of these biomes feel very different and unique, visually and geographically. I'll go so far to say that game developers which are interested in creating an interesting open world to explore should closely study the map of Elex. When I say I love open world RPGs, this is what I mean. Not just wide open fields which serve no purpose, but dense, varied and vertical open worlds. The first city you're going to visit is a great indicator of what you can expect from the exploration in general. Goliath, a huge berserker city with multiple vertical levels, is simply amazing. It has a giant monument that you can see from very far away, like most major locations in Elex. The domed city is another, city that's going to be one of your early destinations. It's not as impressive as Goliath, but it couldn't be more different. People of all factions can be found in this city, and it has one of the best and complex quest lines in the game. The Abessa conflict is the name of that quest, and you can have some bugs and glitches depending on your choices, which can ruin your experience, but more about quests in a minute. Then we have Ignadon, which is the home of the clerics, with a futuristic city full of technology. To be honest, this is my least favorite city in the game. I think it has some generic sci-fi elements, and it shows you that Piranha Bytes lack the experience on this field, but I don't think it's bad in general. Just like every major area in the game, it's fun to explore, but I just don't like the aesthetic of it that much. Then you go to the deserts of Tavar and discover the city of outlaws, which seem like something that came out straight from Mad Max. And just like all major areas in the game, it's very fun to explore. There are a lot of areas in between these locations where you're going to do quests and exploration. The exploration itself wouldn't be that interesting without interesting quests, and luckily Elex is full of those. Now of course you will be able to find a lot of simple RPG quests, but even those are way more fun in a Piranha Bytes game compared to most other RPGs. simply because everything seems like it matters and it adds up at the end, but also because the exploration itself can be pretty rewarding. These legendary items have some very high stat requirements, and they're actually not the most powerful weapons you can use. Fully upgraded items from crafting will have higher damage output and even less stat requirements. There are some low-level legendary items as well, which I used quite a bit in previous playthroughs, but it all depends on which stats you want to get. To go back to quests, your journal will quickly fill up the moment you start the game. In order to join a faction, you'll have to do a serious amount of different quests for people within that faction. But joining a faction won't lock you out from doing side quests for other factions. But you won't get to see all content from other factions, like the promotional quests you would have to do for a rank. While it's usually recommended to join a faction early, I think it's really fun to try and do all quests for everyone before joining a faction. Although I certainly do not recommend doing this on your first playthrough, because you'll get stronger much faster if you decide to join a faction as soon as possible. That's because you can only unlock trainers and unique faction skills when you join a faction. Elex 2 did a little bit better when it comes to not joining a faction early. But overall, it's a huge deal in these games, and there's no going back once you decide to join a faction. It's mostly a huge deal from the gameplay side of things, because you'll only be able to learn abilities from one faction. I think the quests for joining the faction are decent, and even the simplest quests can give you more than a couple of ways to do them, or not do them. A decent amount of quests can be failed in Elex, which I think is a huge deal. There should always be these kinds of consequences for your simple actions in RPGs, if you ask me.
Ignorance of the law is no excuse. You have broken our laws.
And you can never please everyone in the game. No matter what you do and which choices you make while doing quests, you will always make someone mad. It all depends on what you want to do. For example, if you want to join the Berserkers, there are various options you can make while doing the quest for their people. Most of these quests have a surprising amount of depth, which involves morality, personal gain, and your relationship with people from that faction. We can take a very simple side quest from the beginning as an example. I'll have to spoil this little quest just so I can prove a point here and explain what I mean by depth in the quest system. It's not a big deal, and you'll find a lot of similar side quests in the game. Right, so one of the Berserkers has a side quest that involves killing an outlaw that's getting very close to the city. He's trying to convince you that you should simply kill him, but one little detail stands out. He tells you that you should kill him from a distance and not even try to talk with him. That instantly made me believe there is something more to this that the guy is not telling me, so I tried talking to the outlaw. You might expect him to attack you as soon as you get close, and I was ready for that the first time I played the game.
What are you doing here?
I'm waiting on your mom.
But if you talk to him, he'll actually tell you the real truth. He was doing some dirty business and trading with Ornir, the Berserker who gave you the quest, and trading with the outlaws is strictly forbidden. So if you don't kill the outlaw and go back and talk with Ornir, you'll have some options to convince Ornir to make them do business again. That sort of business is strictly forbidden in Goliath, but from the morality standpoint, it seems like the best thing to do because you don't get to kill anyone. However, this will not count as a positive thing towards joining the faction.
Ornir told me that you failed to help him deal with an outlaw he was worried about.
Yeah, this little shit told Ragnar, the warlord of the Berserkers, that you failed to solve his problem. This was my first wake-up call when it comes to quests in Elex. If you want to work with someone, you have to do exactly what they say. You usually have at least a few options to do all of these quests, and those options come with legit consequences, some smaller, some bigger. If you only want to earn XP and levels, then you don't have to care that much about the faction that you're doing the quest for. But if you want to work towards joining a faction, you have to do exactly what the quest giver asked you to do. Well, in most cases. They will also try to trick you, and you can fail on some technicalities, but I won't spoil that. And I'm still only talking about very simple quests you can do in the game. It's insane how well connected they are with other quests and NPCs. I also talked about this in one of my very old videos about quests in Elex. It was about another simple side quest you could do about the sword that you can steal. You don't even have to take the quest to steal the sword, and you can just decide to keep it. or do the quest for the shady guy and sell the sword to him, or even steal it and return it to Ragnar and act like you did some noble deeds. Funny thing about that, the last option will count as a positive thing that will help you to join the faction.
I have one of your swords here.
You stole it from me?
If I'd stolen it, I wouldn't be giving it back.
You know what you have there? That sword is irreplaceable. It belonged to Eric Eisenfaust. You did well in bringing this to me. It doesn't bear thinking what its loss would have meant. You have my thanks.
All of these options are totally legit, and it makes the game world feel very much alive. And of course, the game has skill checks in dialogues as well, which makes the quests even deeper. There are far more complex and deeper quest lines that you can do in this game, like the one I mentioned before in Abessa. It's layers upon layers of quests and sub-quests, but they always end up having some interesting outcomes at the end, depending on what you choose to do. Piranha Bytes has really outdone themselves with the quest design in this game, and combined with a great exploration, it makes the gameplay in Elex very immersive and enjoyable once you get immersed and fully locked in. Some of these decisions and consequences might seem weird, not fair, or predictable, but that only makes them even more immersive and fun, if you ask me. You can't control everything and everyone in the game, even though it might seem possible sometimes. But hey, you can still try to kill most people if you want, and if you can. All of this makes the RPG features in Elex very strong. This would be a good place to mention the cold system. Cold is like a morality/karma system which keeps the track of your actions and give you different titles. Not only that, but it will unlock or disable some future decisions you can make, usually for the main story segments. I only wish the cold system was a bit more straightforward, because you'll have to guess which dialogue option will reduce or bump up your cold meter. It can be very obvious sometimes, but a lot of dialogue options can just surprise you when you lose or gain cold. The main purpose of this will be revealed near the end of the game. I won't spoil anything of course, but you'll get to make some important decisions based on your cold level. And some companions will either going to like your decisions or not, or even abandon you because of your actions. Speaking of companions, Elex made a pretty big step in the right direction with this system. For the first time ever in a PB game, your companions will interact with NPCs you talk with, which is pretty cool.
Good, then you can pay me.
Pay? I will tell Ragnar that you helped me.
Without Elex, there is no mana. Without mana, there is no magic. Without magic, there could be no berserkers. I believe payment for our assistance is more than merited.
As a matter of principle, is it? Very well then.
And all of them have their own unique quests, personalities, and different combat playstyles. The optional quest in the beginning, where you can clear an optional place with Duras, will serve as your base of operations for companions. You can simply send them there with a dialogue option if you don't want them to follow you. The story and the setting in Elex are pretty unique and interesting. The setting of the game might seem like a jumbled mess in the beginning, but once you start learning more about what's going on, it starts to make a lot more sense. The intro cutscene does a great job with explaining the post-apocalypse setting. There was a huge comet which killed the majority of human population, but it also brought the element called Elex. Pretty much everyone who survived started using this element in various ways, and they created 3 factions with completely different ideologies. And eventually people got separated in 4 different factions with completely different ideologies. The Berserkers, Clerics, Alps and Outlaws. All of these factions have their beliefs and rules to live by, even the Outlaws. And of course, all of these factions are at war, pretty much. The Alps are supposed to be the main bad guys, because they're basically Elex junkies without emotions who are at war with everyone. They are also the only faction which the player can't join, but for a good reason. This time around we are not playing as a nameless hero, like in previous Piranha Bytes RPGs. For the first time ever in these RPGs, we get to play as a predetermined character named Jax. I was not a huge fan of Jax in the beginning, because he's bald. No, really, I didn't like him at first, but that started changing as soon as the story started progressing. I thought his performance was stiff and very unnatural in terms of the voice acting, but that actually made a lot of sense. Jax was an emotionless commander of the Alps. The people who keep using Elex all the time as a drug, because it gives them some great powers at the cost of losing all emotions and empathy. They strictly rely on using logic, and they have an ultimate goal they are working towards. That goal turns out to be one of the most important plot twists at the end, which I won't spoil of course. To go back to Jax, it makes sense why he doesn't know how to act when he suddenly finds himself with no Elex in his system. It's a great setup for a clean sheet character in an RPG, much better than some previous Piranha Bytes attempts with the Risen series. For the first time ever in his life, Jax starts feeling various emotions. It's up to the player to decide how he's going to deal with his personality through dialogue and gameplay choices. The game gives you more than enough options to shape Jax's personality, although the outcome of dialogue choices is not always that clear, like I mentioned before. This can cause some frustrations with the dialogue, because you might lose these little opportunities to shape Jax's personality the way you see fit, but it's not a huge problem. All of these little and big choices you make will accumulate your qual level, which will shape the main story in a couple of different ways. Jax starts acting a bit more natural the more you play the game, which makes a lot of sense actually. It's like you have two different main stories, in a way. One is very personal for Jax, because he tries to find out why his people wanted him dead, while the other one is more for the player and the world, where you get a lot of freedom of choice. As with all PBRPGs, the side content and the world in general is as important as the main story. You can't rush the main story, because you'll always find yourself too weak to progress if you don't explore and do side content. So the player's choice of joining a faction and simply exploring the world and doing various side content is not exactly optional. That could have been a bad thing if the world itself and all of its side content sucked. But luckily it's very good in Elex, if not even better than the main story itself. That doesn't mean the main story is bad, by the way. The main story remains mysterious and interesting to the very end. The game has a lot of mini cutscenes where Jax starts remembering the past events. I think there is a very good balance of content in between that, because you and Jax get to learn about, well, everything else. The pacing of the main story will depend on you in a major way. It starts off very slow, because you're very weak in the beginning. You'll have to spend a serious amount of hours doing quests and figuring out which faction to join. So there won't be a huge amount of context about the main story and Jax in the beginning, which is actually a plus in my book. I never try to rush through main stories in these kinds of RPGs because I think it's pointless. So if you're entering Elex expecting to just blast through the main story, you'll be disappointed. I thought it was very fun to learn about this world, what happened before the comet struck, and about the factions in general. You can learn about the lore of Megaland through written notes, or voice notes even, along with a huge amount of environmental storytelling. On the other side, you can learn about all current factions from the people you meet, obviously. All of these factions have something interesting going on. The Berserkers are cultivating these weird seeds, which are supposed to purify the earth. They reject technology but use mana and magic, which they transmute from Elex, and their leader is missing. That last part has nothing to do with the first part, but I just think it's interesting. Clerics are worshipping a god called Kalan, but they believe in technology as well. That's a bit ironic, but interesting, so it makes you want to learn more. Outlaws are just being outlaws in the desert, and they use a lot of drugs. Surprise, surprise. They consider themselves to be the only free people of Megaland because they don't follow the strict rules of the Berserkers or believe in cleric's god Kalan. The Alps are the most mysterious, but you get to learn about them while progressing through the main story with Jax. When everything is said and done, the game ends on a huge cliffhanger, which made me really hate the game back in 2017, because I knew we had to wait for at least 3 to 4 years for a sequel. The main story was never the strongest aspect of previous Piranha Bytes games, but I think they finally made a huge leap when it comes to the quality of the main story in Elex. The seamless blend of sci-fi and fantasy is very impressive and, more importantly, very interesting. As for the characters, Elex can be a mixed bag. The game has no shortage of characters to meet from all factions. While some of them are definitely memorable, a lot of them are not. That doesn't mean they are bad or boring, most of them will give you something interesting to do. And I think that's far more important than just having an interesting personality that you're going to remember these characters for. It would be amazing if we got the best of both worlds, and we had some amazing characters and content that's related to them. It's not like Elex doesn't have such characters, but I wish it had more of them. The majority of followers you get are great characters in general. Come to think of it, they're probably the best characters in the game, and they're very memorable. All of them have unique backgrounds, stories, and quests, and there is a little plot twist for each and every one of them. It's pretty damn cool. You'll have to complete their personal quests in order to get to that point. And like I mentioned before, they will agree or disagree with you, which will increase or decrease your reputation with them. Pretty impressive stuff for a AA RPG, I would say. And yet another reason to give this game a chance if you enjoy interesting stories in RPGs. The technical state of this game is pretty good in general on PC and consoles. I mean, it's a pretty old game, even though that's hard for me to admit, because 2017 was like 3 years ago in my mind. Crazy how time flies. Anyway, I personally own a Steam version on my PC and the PlayStation 4 version of the game, which I'm playing on my PlayStation 5. There is an Xbox version of the game as well, but I never played it. Although by the looks of things it looks and it performs very similar to the PlayStation 4 version. I really don't have a lot of things to say about the performance, because it's pretty easy to run this game nowadays on a semi-decent hardware. I was able to run this game almost maxed out in 4K with my RTX 4060 Ti, but you'll see my full PC specs on the screen. I don't even remember dropping frames at all during my 2 different playthroughs I had recently. I think Elex managed to hit a specific sweet spot when it comes to the artistic style in general. The mix of somewhat realistic environments and semi-cartoonic characters works really well. The color palette is definitely vibrant, but it's not overdone, I would say. It's certainly far from having a darker and gloomy aesthetic of Gothic 1 and 2, but this studio moved away from that aesthetic far before Elex. I never had a problem with the more vibrant and colorful visual styles in my RPGs, even though they get a bad rep nowadays. I think Elex manages to separate itself from similar games by the nature of its unique setting. A setting that mixes so many different themes together, and it does it in a seamless way. And you simply cannot achieve something like this without a good artistic direction. A huge part of what makes the game look like this is the in-house game engine which Piranha Bytes used for 20 years. But let's not get carried away with the technical side of the game engine. From the beginning of the game, you'll notice that the world of Elex is dominated by this overgrown aesthetic. Nature has basically consumed the old world of Magellan, and all that's left are these ruins, which serve like a nice little environmental storytelling element. Most inhospitable places are usually covered in this overgrown aesthetic, where you can see various plants and trees covering the ruins of the old worlds. Even Goliath, the first big city you get to visit in the game, has some parts like this. The entire city has this magical fantasy Vikings vibe because of the way it's built. Before you get to this place, you might get an idea that this is an entirely different game, judging by the visuals. You might get the feel that you're playing a post-apocalyptic RPG similar to Fallout, then you get thrown into Skyrim all of a sudden. All jokes aside, the visual variety in Elex is one of its biggest strengths, that's for sure. The way the game looks in general won't be everyone's cup of tea, of course, but I personally think it aged very well because of the stylized aesthetic. And even the visual fidelity ain't all that bad for a 2017 game, especially if you can run it in very high resolutions. I also think it looks pretty decent on consoles. I guess my least favorite part about the visuals is how they designed some sci-fi areas, like the Horde. It just has a very generic sci-fi look to it, and I think it shows Piranha Bytes' lack of experience when it comes to sci-fi settings. On the other hand, the domed city looks pretty damn cool. I love how the deserts of Tavar looks in general, although I'm not so crazy about the forts. But yeah man, overall, the visual variety in this game is amazing. The soundtrack in the game is a mixed bag, even though there are some very good and memorable tracks that I still listen very often. But compared to some previous Piranha Bytes work, Elex doesn't come even close, unfortunately. However, the environmental sounds are great, and they create an amazing atmosphere while exploring the world. I I already touched upon the sound effects before, but I have to mention again that they are not very good. The voice acting is pretty solid in general.
The selection is more limited than I'd like, but it's what we have.
I didn't know that Elex was forbidden.
Ignorance of the law is no excuse. You have broken our laws. But, on this occasion, I will give you a chance to redeem yourself.
And that will be everything I wanted to talk about related to Elex.
It could have been a lot worse.
I really think this game deserves another chance in 2026, despite all of its issues. If you like good stories and great open worlds, and you can handle a little bit of jank, don't miss out on this amazing RPG experience. Anyway, tell me your thoughts about Elex in the comments below. Do you plan to try it out for the first time ever in 2026, or maybe come back for another playthrough? Let me know. Don't forget to check out Eneba, the sponsor of this video, and get the best deals for Elex and many other games. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more content like this. And if you want to go a step further, consider supporting your boy by becoming a YouTube channel member or a Patreon. Huge thanks to all my current supporters, and I'll see ya in the next one.